Continuing to read Dallas Pimiento, Book 1, Bronco. Button. The button bore a picture of Hillary Clinton. Dallas Pimiento pinned it to the lapel of what he called his beatnik coat, an off-the-rack sports jacket with natural shoulders. Shoulder pads were such a crazy concept, Rectus Aimwell commented. Are you being catty? Pimiento asked him, careful not to prick his finger as he completed the pinning procedure. I ask because I don't think I really know what catty is. No, that's not catty, Aimwell mused. Besides, I don't think I'm really the right type to be considered as catty or to make catty statements. Pimiento held his cuffs carefully as he drew on the coat. Anyway, continued Aimwell, the natural shoulder is so much better. I agree with you, Pimiento said through his teeth as he checked his hair, especially the crown, in the full-length mirror with the carved frame. Fat-bellied cherubs and sober-faced businessmen tumbled about its circumference amid a tightly knotted array of morning glories. Are you afraid you'll catch hell from the rednecks for wearing that button? Aimwell asked. No more than you are when you wear your Captain Beefheart button. Pimiento looked down at his shoes ruefully. Not only were they lace-ups, but they were dreadfully scuffed. Oh, I've changed it. Now I wear a Franz Klein button. Aimwell folded his arms and leaned against the wall of the antechamber. It's the same thing, Pimiento told him. How do you figure? Well, it's someone the average redneck doesn't know on sight, and when you explain it to them, they'll think it's nothing but rank pretension. Well, it is, isn't it? Not if you really mean it. Not if you really believe in the person you wear on your button. Do you really believe in Hillary Clinton? Aimwell wanted to know. Pimiento took a breath before he answered. No, but I believe in what she stands for, pissing off Bush and his Bible-thumping followers. Dreadnought. A dreadnought, gentlemen, is a wonderful thing. The elder Thorboldsen, whose belly prohibited him from sitting any closer to the boardroom table, rubbed that belly with his fingertips. Nance Rallard stared intently at Thorboldsen's signet ring as Thorboldsen rubbed. It's an old-timey battleship, isn't it? Asked Peeny, another of the powerful executives seated around the table. Old-timey, Rallard thought contemptuously. That's right, Mr. Peeny. Thorboldsen, who had built Ribbonomics into a statewide distribution overseer from a tiny part of the estate left to him by his father, pushed his buttocks luxuriously back into his chair, rocking back and forth, feeling his femoral sockets push satisfyingly against his skin. He had to lean forward to do this properly. He put his elbows and forearms on the table and pushed and rocked at will. More than one man at the table thought the fat old man was about to fart. Instead, as he continued to speak, he reached one hand down and performed some other action equally satisfying to him that the others could guess at, but were relieved they could not actually see. A dreadnought is an old-timey battleship. He gazed up at the ceiling. It's a wonderful thing. Nance Rallard glanced across at Dan Chuck. He raised his left eyebrow briefly in a display of bewilderment and disgust. Chuck, not so bold as Rallard, merely stared back wide-eyed. He was every bit as bewildered and disgusted. Rallard wanted to take out a piece of paper, write boring on it, and hold it up to Chuck. Have you ever ridden on one? Peeny asked his chief. I'm not that old, Mr. Peeny, Thorboldsen chuckled, pulling his lowered hand up to his nose and sniffing it. No, but I have seen one in dry dock. He looked about at the other men's faces with a sudden flash of his full executive authority. The proud lady, he declared, slapping his ringed hand down on the tabletop. A fine old ship. He gazed up at the ceiling. After a good 10 seconds had passed in silence, Rallard spoke up. The proud lady was the dreadnought's name? He asked. Thorboldsen looked at Rallard. Oh, yes, the proud lady, a wonderful thing. Gum. Dallas Pimiento chewed the gum until the sugar in it had been extracted by his oral processes, then looked about for a place to discard it. Some people were gum chewers, some were not. He remembered watching a John Lennon concert on videotape during which Lennon chewed gum the whole time. The only reason Pimiento had put the gum in his mouth in the first place was because his breath was foul. It was always foul. Normally he wouldn't care, but he had to speak secretly with a lady, and no other breath-freshening agents were at hand save this piece of wintergreen gum he had begged from the lady's butler. Mrs. Staytack will see you now, sir, the butler informed him. Thanks. Pimiento nodded and rose from his seat. He looked about feverishly as he walked towards the door. Finally, mainly because the butler was right there, he jerked a piece of paper out of his pocket, lyrics to a song he was writing, and pushed the gum into it with his tongue. He stuffed the wadded up paper back in his pocket just as the door was opened. "Ah, Mr. Pimiento, it's good to see you again." Mrs. Statek sat on a love seat before a glass-shelved serving trolley laden with a teapot, cups, and a platter of ugly, hard-looking cookies. "Hi, Mrs. Statek." Pimiento smiled as well as he could. "Would you like some tea?" the lady asked. She was about 10 years older than Pimiento and clad in a long satin robe adorned with stars. On her head was a tiara. "Yes, please," Pimiento almost begged. Perhaps hot tea would make his breath smell better and get this gum taste out of his mouth. "Have a seat," Mrs. Statek invited as she poured a cup of tea. The steam rose in tiny arching dragons. She passed him his cup. "Will you have a biscuit as well?" "No, thank you. Trying to stay slim," he patted his gut. "How have you been?" Mrs. Statek asked. "Oh, fine," Pimiento answered. The cup poised at his lips. He sipped carefully, knowing it was hot. Intriguing flavor. What was it? As the lady made some innocuous pleasantry, he sipped again, deeper this time, getting a deeper grasp on the flavor. When he realized what it was, he spat what was in his mouth back in the cup unceremoniously. "This has caffeine in it," he charged. Talisman. The shaman reached into his shirt and drew out a miniature trumpet attached to a chain around his neck. He spoke in the language of the people of the forest, translated here for your benefit into substandard English. "In Echo Room, play you this thing," he said, grinning. He was missing a few teeth, but no more so than most postal workers. "What language is that?" Dallas Pimiento asked. "Take this thing," the old half-naked man instructed. He unsnapped the chain and pulled it through the tiny thumb hole on the trumpet. "Take this thing," he repeated, holding out the trumpet to Pimiento. "I take this most graciously," said Pimiento. "At least, I hope I do," he added, glancing back at Puluo, his guide. "Now give him your offering," Puluo whispered. Smiling constantly, Pimiento reached into his bag. His father would have disapproved his carrying it, even after seeing Indiana Jones carry one nearly identical to it, and pulled out a bag of chocolate-covered ants. "Here?" he said, handing them over. "You're sure he likes these things?" he asked Puluo, without taking his eyes off the shaman or ceasing to smile. "Who can say, boss?" Later that evening, after he had returned to base camp, Pimiento radioed his wife. "I got it," he said, somewhat more emphatically than he intended, and with an obvious undercurrent of irritation. Bugs were swarming all around. "Good," Elsa replied, sounding every bit as irritated. In the background, Pimiento could hear one of the children making a fuss. "Fox wants to talk to you," his wife told him. "Pop," 7-year-old Fox greeted Pimiento in a voice thick with tears. "Hey, Fox, what's wrong?" "Mom won't let me watch TV," came the answer. "I'm sorry about that." Pimiento tried to calm the boy down. After being given a brief, distracted reiteration of the day's events, Fox asked to hear the trumpet blown. "I can't blow it until I get back," Pimiento told him. "I can't blow it until I'm with you and your mother and your sister." Landscape filter. Once blown, the trumpet talisman acted as a landscape filter, removing Pimiento and his family from the world of distractions and obstructions, and helping to boil this macro narrative down to a more manageable condition. On the morning after blowing the trumpet in the stairwell of the UGA library, Pimiento awoke in a much more constricted and simplified universe. Of course, this simplification was somewhat subjected. The fact that his old friend Speak was now living downstairs from him did somewhat complicate matters. However, the fact that until now there had been no downstairs was proof enough that the shaman's theories and Pimento's expectations had been fulfilled. Pimiento found that he had been awakened by the sound of the trumpet being blown. How could this be? It was still being blown. He could hear it. He didn't have it. The sound was coming from the next room. He leapt out of bed. Fox was blowing through it. "Fox!" Pimiento shouted. "No!" He hurried over and took it away from his son. Fox retreated. Pimiento looked anxiously at the horn. How much damage had the boy done? Better hide this thing away before the kids got hold of it again. As he stowed it in a hiding place in his room, Pimiento wondered if perhaps the so-called magic had run out, or if its manifestation was limited to himself alone. Either way, he hoped so. Things should be just the way he wanted them to be. That was when he discovered Speak outside. To Speak, an outsider to the workings of the trumpet, things were as they had always been. For Pimiento, they would take some familiarization. "Hey, buddy," Speak greeted him. "Hey," said Pimiento. "I didn't know you got up so early." Early? It's noon. Noon? Pimiento puzzled. He walked over to the balcony on which Speak sat smoking a cigarette and reading the paper. The sky had an unusual dullness to it. The grounds below looked strange. Everything was in place, but he could see everything. He could see the post office, the mall, his grandparents' old house, even though he was standing on the balcony of Speak's apartment. That in itself was strange, because Speak lived 10 miles away. The trumpet changed me, said Pimiento aloud, to Speak's amusement. Ethos of the fragment. The spy, Brenda Lamb, splashed a handful of cologne about her face and neck. She hummed as she splashed. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub watching her was Ramiz Abanjo, her roommate. "Why are you using cologne?" Ramiz asked Brenda. "I like to smell good," Brenda told her, "and in my business it's often advantageous to engender positive feelings in others through scent." "I understand that," Ramiz was peevish, "but why cologne?" "What do you mean? Why not perfume?" "What's the difference?" "Perfume is for women. Cologne is for men." Brenda, in the act of checking her teeth, ceased doing this and turned to Ramiz with a smile. She picked up the bottle from which she had anointed herself. "Smell this," she said. Ramiz did so. "It smells good," Ramiz said. The scent was a complex bouquet containing hints of kerosene, pine straw, horse manure, overripe pears, and baby shampoo, among other things. "So what's the problem?" Brenda demanded, taking back the bottle and making certain the top was secure. That bottle had cost her $75. "It says cologne on the label," Ramiz pointed. Brenda looked at the label. The name of the fragrance was Gale. "So?" she was amused. "So, cologne is for men," Ramiz was emphatic. She turned and put the plug in the tub. "And you think that because the word cologne is on the label, this scent is intended for men only, and that a woman who wears it is, what, a criminal?" Ramiz had turned on the water. "You're going against the manufacturer's recommendations," Ramiz said lamely. Brenda did not laugh. She wanted to splash some of the cologne on her roommate. Such was her irritation at Ramiz's obtuseness, but the stuff was just too expensive. Vegetative anomalies. "Well, Paul, what sort of vegetable anomalies do you have for us today?" Mason Fling asked Paul Funebre onto camera, prompting one of the assistant directors of Rural Science Now to hiss at the director. "He said it wrong again!" As the director signaled that he too had witnessed the mangling of the show segment's title on the elaborate set, the action continued. "Well, the first thing we have today," Funebre began, moving to a table covered with various items, "is the mosquito-mato. In at least one household in the Oglethorpe-Clark-Oconee County nexus, someone reacted strongly to the name of that first item. Harry, this is Buck. Something has just happened." "What?" Harry glanced at the clock irritably. It wasn't a charitable hour to be calling. "Someone is using the mosquito-mato name without permission and applying it to an actual vegetable." Buck's eyes went back to the TV. Funebre and Fling had moved on to something else. It looked like a corn cob shaped like a fish, or was it a fish with kernels of corn instead of scales? He listened while Harry talked, then answered him. "I don't know, some kind of tomato. I didn't hang around watching it. It was enough to know they were abusing the name." They talked a minute more before concluding the call. Buck hung up the phone and returned to the TV. He was still in his pajamas. He sipped his coffee and wondered how best to proceed with his grievance. On TV, Fling thanked Funebre cheerfully and looked into the camera as the director of the program cut to a commercial. "Mason," the director called over the loudspeaker, "the segment is called Vegetative Anomalies, not Vegetable." "Did I say that wrong again? I'm sorry." Fling snapped his fingers at a girl who rushed over and brought him an ashtray. She held it while Fling sucked on a cigarette as fast and hard as he could. "See ya, Mason," Paul Funebre waved at the show's host as he pushed the rolling table off the set. "Sure." Fling winked at the farmer for whom he was doing a big favor. Floating Stick Man. "We shall follow the floating stick man," Will Gummian declaimed in a voice quavering with both age and the burden of authority. "A kind of madness has come over him," No-Leg Mule said to his three companions. "It is the madness of a return to childish play," Apjohn agreed. "I experienced that one," said the last to speak of the trio. His name was Scuddo. "I had dropped some acid." The three stood at the rear of the crowd that faced Gummian. As the old man continued to orate, Apjohn jerked his head and led his companions on to the next group of people, this one smaller and standing before a display of gleaming white kitchen appliances. "Let's keep moving," Scuddo urged. "Wait," begged Apjohn. A man on the platform with the appliances called out in a deep voice, "Who would like to come up here and demonstrate the voluminous storage area of the retro-made Model 800 refrigerator?" Do it, No-Leg, hissed Scutto. You do it, No-Leg returned. Yes, Scutto, go up and Apjohn started to say, but it was too late. Someone else, an older man, had already ascended the steps of the platform. Come right up, sir, said the appliance man. Can I get your name, sir? Stan Ignorbus, the volunteer replied. All right, Stan. I'm going to ask you to step inside the all-new Retro Mead Model 800 refrigerator. The pitchman started to lead his volunteer to the refrigerator. Step inside, Ignorbus repeated warily. Don't worry, sir. You see, we have an air hole cut into this display unit. Won't the cold air come out? You're very sharp, Stan, but this unit is for demonstration purposes only. He opened the door and took Ignorbus by the elbow, steering him inside. A sour look was on the man's face as the door was shut upon him. What do you think, Stan? The appliance man asked. The floating stick man is our icon, Ignorbus called out. Listen to the man in the box, folks. The appliance man turned to the crowd and pointed. Louse of collections. After I had hit upon the idea of contaminating the group's ice water with tiny worms, I felt justified in taking a break. There seemed to be no available rest chamber, so I climbed to the roof where I met Dallas Pimiento for the first time. He was standing at the railing looking down on the movements of the artificial elements below. As I kicked at some of the pea gravel on the roof, he turned and saw me. Hi, he said. Hello, I returned. He was about the same height as I, but thinner. He wore an outfit that I might have worn, could I but afford such vintage wear. I was wearing my lab coat and fake eyeglasses. After glancing back at the activity below, he looked back at me, studying my attire. You work in the lab here, he asked. Sometimes, I answered. I meant to say nothing more, but relented. From what perception of empathy between us, I cannot say. I own the building, I said. He raised his eyes slightly. Your Lance Ash, he asked. Yes. His foot, which had been propped up on the rail, came down. Pimiento looked at me over the top. Pimiento looked me over, top to bottom, and back up to my face again. Of course, I immediately wondered if he was appraising me as a potential sexual companion. I am always flattered by such perusals, whether they come from a woman or a man, but no. He was apparently judging if he could take me in a fight. I imagined you'd be taller, he said. More hulking, I joked. Perhaps. His eyes were suddenly cold, like a freeze frame of the instant before the bull charges. Who are you, I asked, since he was being so rude. I'm Dallas Pimiento, he told me. The hell you say. I took off my glasses and put them away carefully in the side pocket of my coat before I charged him. I suppose he thought his big stapler would do something. I took it out of his hand before I tossed him over the roof. The tiny worms were unnecessary. Toast scrapings. Breakfast on the evening before the end of all human civilization consisted of tea and toast, traditional fare that went down well with those of us gathered for the meal. All of us, that is, except Norman, who complained. No meat, he scowled. The human body isn't designed to eat meat, I addressed his concern. Ah, Norman's wife pounced. You admit the human body is designed. I looked down at the table for a moment, mouth tightly compressed in an ironic smile. I looked up at my other mealtime companions and then back at Norman and his wife. As she was about to say something like, You don't have to answer to that. Do you? Hold on a second. I pushed two buttons on a small panel beside me. Norman and his wife, whose name I never learned, dropped through sprung trapdoors down into something resembling their mystical medieval hell. Would anyone like to join me up on the roof, I asked. I don't know, Lance, said one young man. There's a TV show, a really loud one, starting in 5 minutes I'd like to watch. He smiled. It was a joke. I dramatically circled my finger above the button connected to his chair to show I got the joke, but didn't think it was all that funny. Everyone, as far as I remembered, accompanied me to the roof. I carried 2 pieces of toast with me and a cup of tea. As we stepped up onto the roof, we could hear the sound of the end of civilization. I calmly sipped my tea and ate my toast. How can you eat like that at a time like this? Martha demanded. I do believe she was angry, as if the destruction in the distance was somehow my fault. Because I'm not upset, I told her. Not upset? The Rolling Stones, the Paris Opera, General Mills, Stone Mountain, Napoleon's Tomb, Key West, all gone. And you're not upset? She began crying. I really don't know what you want me to say. I dusted my hands off. I'm still alive. You're still alive. Everyone in this building is still alive. What good is it? She sobbed. Larry, Jack, I said to 2 guys in the party. I said to 2 of the guys in the party. I'm a little tired. Would you oblige me? I pointed at Martha. They nodded, came forward, picked up the still sobbing woman, and threw her off the roof. Okay, we're going to stop there for tonight.